Amazing. Hi, everybody. Everybody's joining from all over today. Thank you so much. We are so excited for this program. Before we get started today, I just want to do some quick housekeeping things. We do have an upcoming program. Our April community call is coming up this Monday, so it's coming up really quick. I can't believe it's April already. But this month, we will remember the devastating tragedy of the April 2013 Rana Plaza collapse and learn how resilient workers in Bangladesh united over the last decade to win safety through the International Accord, a blueprint for how brands and factories workers came together for a safer garment industry. We'll put the link for the registration of the community call so you could learn more about the International Accord and the speakers that we'll have on the call in the chat. And also, April is crazy with events with Rana Plaza and Earth Day going on. There's so much happening, so you can check out the event site on our Remake page to see virtual events that are going on and some in-person events in different cities across the globe. So I will drop those links in the chat in a moment. And I also see a lot of new faces and names on this call today, so welcome if this is your first virtual program. Before we dive into the report, I wanted to share a little bit more about Remake. We believe that a better, more just fashion industry is possible. And we know that change doesn't just happen, it takes really great leaders. And that's why we work to empower the next generation of activists. I know many people I see on this call have joined us in campaigns before. We also scale and catalyze campaigns, build radical collaboration between unions and legislators, individuals, and brands. And our work, like free virtual programming and the production of the accountability report, which we'll be talking all about today, is possible because of support from changemakers like you. So if you'd like to support Remake's work further, I would like to invite you to be a part of our Gen program, which is gives every month. And this is a great way to support Remake and our work on a regular basis at a level that's comfortable for you. So you can find the link to become a Gem in the chat. Emily's dropping it in there now. And if you have any questions about supporting Remake's work or becoming more involved, feel free to email ambassador@remake.world, and we can definitely chat on how to involve you more. So I will get started with the program. And before I hand it on over to our accountability team, just some introductions. So corporate accountability is such an important topic for all of us who engage in fashion to understand, especially when it comes to our advocacy for a fair and less environmentally detrimental global industry. So Remake's advocacy team is here today to talk about Remake's 2024 Fashion Accountability Report, from our research to key findings, as well as ways that the report can be utilized as a change-making tool, no matter what your relationship with fashion is. We will also have time for Q&A at the end, so I'm trying to run through things really quick, and discussion. So if you have questions or things to bring up, feel free to type them in the chat, and Emily and I will collect them for the team at the end of the call, or you can just hold on to them and bring them up when our team is done talking about the report. And before I hand it on over to them, I'd love to see in the chat what your role and relationship in relation to fashion is. Whether you're an active citizen, if you're looking to apply sustainability principles to your own business, or if you work for a fashion brand, and there's no need to share the company name unless you're comfortable, but we'd love to hear how you're involved in the fashion industry in the chat, and if you've ever used Remake's accountability reports before and how you use them. So I'll give everybody a minute just to type in the chat, and we could see why everyone's here today. Running our own independent magazine. That's awesome. Working in marketing for a fashion retailer. We have such a strong community of people working all over the industry. Freelancer, denim designer, fashion design school. Kaylin, this is the first time hearing about the report. Thank you for being here today. Students. Awesome, awesome. Hopefully we can answer all of your guys' questions about how you could use this report in your own life and in your own work. So I'm going to hand it on over to the team. We have Becca and Alexa here today, who are Remake Senior Advocacy Managers who lead the research and development of the accountability report, and Julie, who is Remake's Managing Director in New York. So Alexa, I'm going to hand it on over to you first so we can hear, why we need the accountability report.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you so much to everyone who joined today. This report has really been such a long time coming for us, and we've already had so many great questions come in from the community, so we're excited to hear all of your feedback. So first, just to set the stage on the current state of the industry, we've had 30 years of voluntary accountability efforts with brands and retailers increasingly promised to grow their sustainability commitments. And yet progress has really stalled when it comes to the industry's human rights and environmental impacts. We've seen a lot of top-down approaches that lack any kind of binding mechanisms or direct supplier and worker engagement, resulting in fashion companies really putting a lot of the risk onto their suppliers, especially when it comes to things like decarbonizing manufacturing processes or paying workers living wages. And so, despite all of these lofty commitments made by companies in recent years, they're not only coming up short, but they're also not acting as true partners to the people that they depend on to make their products. And of course, we know that this incremental progress, with a lot of it being focused right now on greenhouse gas emissions and materials, it continues to come at the expense of supply chain workers, most of whom live and work in the same communities experiencing the worst impacts of climate change. And time again, we see changes born from tragedies, whether it be the Shirtwaist Triangle factory or the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh. But what we're not seeing is broader systemic change. And so we've really reached a point where the industry needs real corporate accountability, and we'll explain what this means based on our report findings. So for those of you who may be new to Remake's accountability work, our annual accountability report tracks the progress of some of the most well-known fashion companies by measuring them against our own intersectional metrics that were made to de-silo the environmental and social sides of sustainability. So I will pass it on to Becca to explain our methodology now.
Thanks, Alexa. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. You may know that this year we assessed 52 brands, all of which earned at least 100 million US dollars in annual revenue. We do this because it's the larger companies that both have the greatest impact on people and the planet, and that are more well-resourced and therefore better equipped to facilitate change on an industry level. Beyond size, companies were also selected based on their notoriety, be it because they're household names or because they're associated with particularly egregious issues or because they're particularly relevant to the sustainability conversation. Some others we've been tracking due to their relevance to our broader campaign work. So companies are scored out of 150 total points for metrics spread across 6 key categories. And these are traceability, wages and well-being, commercial practices, which is how companies relate to their suppliers, raw materials, environmental justice, and governance. So we score and research companies only based on information that's in the public domain. This is to encourage brands to increase transparency and traceability, which is absolutely foundational to accountability, and so that we can both celebrate progress when they are meeting their various targets and, most importantly, hold their feet to the fire when they renege on their various goals. We have the freedom to operate as an independent watchdog group since we don't take any money from the industry, and this sort of allows us to better serve workers and our broader community. So this report is really intended to serve as a roadmap for all of you who participate in fashion, so that you can advocate for a fairer fashion system from wherever you sit in relation to the industry. It really speaks to an audience beyond brands, including citizens, employees, policymakers, and investors. So citizens, we hope, can use their voices to demand more from brands and use the report as an educational tool to participate in campaigns, organize and support policies for systemic reform. Employees can use this report and our score sheet to create change from within the companies they work with, to shape internal dialogue, public disclosures, commercial practices, and strategies that center a just transition to a more sustainable fashion industry. We really hope that shareholders use this report as a tool for understanding the intersectional risks across garment supply chains that will affect long-term operational resilience and profits for companies and investors alike. And in that vein, use these findings to guide the movement of capital to where it matters, i.e. climate mitigation and adaptation. And then policymakers as well, using this as an educational tool to develop and inform worker-driven policy to build support for fashion-centric legislation and new business models that have effective accountability mechanisms like joint liability. So I'm going to pass it back to Alexa now to chat a bit more about our findings and our roadmap.
So the report lays out an industry roadmap made up of roadmap solutions and what we call our remake metrics, and these are highlighted separately in the beige boxes throughout the report. And these really address the major gaps we've identified in terms of disclosures and action, and 4 key areas where we urgently need more focus. For instance, the issue of overproduction. Though it's the main driver of fashion's environmental impact, it's still largely being ignored. The growing volume of production continues to outweigh product level advancements made in things like resource efficiency and circularity. And with so few companies actually financing and scaling decarbonization in their supply chains, we also see the need for contextual emissions reduction strategies that are funded by the brands and then co-created with manufacturers so that the unique capabilities and constraints of individual suppliers are accounted for in these plans. And as the climate crisis intensifies, companies also need to invest in climate adaptation. In other words, factory worker and community resilience, so that their supply chains can actually withstand extreme weather events that are popping up with more frequency. And then when it comes to commercial practices and living wages, we've also seen a major gap in transparency and disclosures. Right now, the power and wealth imbalance in fashion supply chains allows for companies to dictate pricing and contract terms, and this puts downward pressure on suppliers that ultimately prevents progress on living wages. Meanwhile, a lot of the responsibility is still placed onto the manufacturers when it comes to upholding minimum labor rights and environmental standards. And so legally binding commitments and fair contracts that require shared responsibility for preventing and remediating adverse supply chain impacts are a necessary piece of the puzzle. But ultimately, for the systemic change we need to actually occur, legislation and binding agreements that hold companies jointly accountable for human rights and environmental impacts are crucial. And these proposals need to, 1, center and be created in consultation with workers themselves, and 2, include up-chain accountability mechanisms from the outset. So both of these aspects are crucial if we're to have laws that don't continue to perpetuate the power structures that are responsible for where we are in the fashion industry.
So here we have an example of how we've sort of laid out a roadmap within our report, focusing specifically here on overproduction. You can see in our remake metrics that there are so many intersectional metrics relating to overproduction, and so companies need to take an intersectional approach when looking at addressing overproduction and waste. So, reducing absolute and not simply per garment emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, sharing progress towards goals to eliminate both pre and post-consumer textile waste, creating durable and timeless products using the provision of repair and upcycling, rental and resale services to replace production of new goods, disclosing how many products it produces every year and then actually reducing them, transitioning away from a business model that relies on the exponential growth of retail footprint and product output, reporting on and monitoring workers' hours and overtime scored and sourcing from unionized factories, ensuring a living wage is paid to garment workers across the supply chain, engaging in fair contracting and purchasing practices with suppliers, protecting the rights of agricultural workers all the way at the raw material level, and choosing less environmentally impactful materials, those that are regenerative rather than depleting in nature. And so, yeah, these really touch on all of the key areas that we are asking people to focus on. And you can find these throughout the report, as well as what you see on the right here. So roadmap solutions highlighting either things that companies are doing well or what we believe that companies should be focusing on based on our research and what have you. I know we've skimmed through a lot of our methodology and some of the findings in our report. So we really wanted to take this opportunity today to hear from all of you, wherever you sit within the fashion industry, to answer your questions about our scoring, how you might use this report wherever you find yourselves, how to perhaps have some of the harder conversations with your teams and your superiors if you're working in a brand, and perhaps even sharing experiences among all of you. We know that there are a lot of people within our community that are working within brands, that are looking to advocate for better policy, to ask questions about the kind of policy that's coming down the line. And so we really thought this could be a learning experience for all of us. And so with that, I would love to open up the Q&A portion of the webinar, and really hope that we can get an engaging dialogue going. Maybe I'll stop sharing my screen as well so we can kind of see everyone. Feel free to, I don't know, Alison, do you want to pull questions out, or people can raise their hand if they want to ask questions off the chat?
Yeah, I have a question. So how could I use this report, for example, if I wanted to have a conversation with my supervisor about one of the roadmap suggestions that you outlined that I feel that the company could better address?
Julie, do you want to take that one, given
Sure,
your years of experience?
That's the number one question, Emily.
Yeah.
It's excellent. I think we all start there, right? What I find just in going through this report, there's so much information in it. It's like, take your time, honestly, to look through it, because it's not like a one day, one read kind of thing. It's almost like take it section by section. And if you are working in a brand, what's first interesting is to understand what your company is doing, because you may not even be aware of some initiatives that the company does believe in and they're like actually investing in or investigating currently. So I would like almost start there as a place of, what are we doing in this area? And that's really a great opening that expresses like your interest in, like, are we doing anything to reduce synthetic materials? This is something I'm really interested in. Or I think, just start with one thing. Literally, this report is so extensive. You'll see how many points there are for whether you're interested in the materials aspect or the supplier that you're using in a particular region, like Bangladesh. Like, oh, we're producing our cover-ups in Bangladesh. Are we part of the accord? Like, look it up first. Like I would say, first do your own research, ask questions just on your team. And I always say, don't assume anything, because just because it's not in our report or in the public domain doesn't actually mean that your company isn't working towards some aspect of it. But the report just gives you great language and at least some initial questions to first ask yourself, ask your teammates, do a little research, and then bubble it up would be my advice.
I have some questions. I can go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, so as a freelancer, I work with various brands throughout, globally. If I'm working with a brand that does produce in Bangladesh for, everyone on the Remake team, does that innately have this thought of like, oh, they're already not a great brand? I know Bangladesh is kind of the mecca for all of this. Are there brands and factories there that are making strides? They're just kind of in the middle of all of the difficult things.
Yeah, so I can take this one. I work on Remake's Accord campaign, and what we've seen actually in the past 10 years since the Bangladesh Accord was established is that the industry there has actually gotten much safer as a result. So there's actually research showing that deaths and incidents have gone down in the past 10 years. And as a result, the US government and the EU have both actually promoted the Accord to brands and are trying to encourage more to sign on. And so factories also have multiple brands as buyers. And so there could be an Accord signatory, which would, so that means that the entire factory would be covered by the Accord, and there could still be other signatories producing in that same factory. So not necessarily. It's definitely a question to bring up. Especially if, say, you're working with a brand who is particularly focused on trying to create a more ethical supply chain. I think, as the report points out, these kind of legally binding agreements that force brands to be jointly accountable for the impacts in their supply chains is super important. And it's kind of been a proven case for and template for how these things actually function in reality. And there's so many resources on the Accords website that you can point to too. And now they actually do have a lot of research up that points to some of the actual figures on impacts and progress.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my next question is if there was a suggestion on the best place to research for the Bangladesh Accord, like if Remake had its own um, research put together, or if I'm just looking obviously at Google.
Yeah, we have a lot. We have FAQs for both the International Accord and Pakistan Accord. They're kind of both ongoing campaigns that are tied together. And you can find those on Remake's website on our campaigns page. And then I would definitely also refer to the Accord's individual documents on their supplier pages and updates as well on their website.
Okay.
If I can
Okay, thank you.
I can.
as well too. I've just dropped a link in the chat for our April community call where we'll be talking about all things related to the international accord, both in Bangladesh and Pakistan. And also wanted to highlight that that's one of the metrics that is analyzed in this report. So you can understand by looking at the report if brands have or have not signed on. Becca, do go ahead and jump in. We did have a question about like free riding on the Accord, which I can address if that wasn't what you were going to address.
I just wanted to say that it's important to know that there are good and bad factories everywhere. And so I wouldn't assign a certain reputation to a factory just based on its country. And I would really encourage you to ask the companies that you work with what their sourcing like criteria are for the factories that they work with. You know, how are they working with their suppliers as partners to ensure that their labor standards are high. And to Emily's point, you know, they might be a smaller brand with a very like small in comparison sourcing footprint in a country like Bangladesh. And so to our earlier point is that we assess large companies and we really ask these big companies to sign on and lead the way with binding agreements like the Accord, because they're the ones that set the bar for the others. You know, if you're a small independent retailer producing in Bangladesh, like even if you signed onto the Accord, like your footprint is really small, it doesn't necessarily have the power to make broader systemic change. And so we really need to put pressure on the large companies to sort of help lift up and level the playing field for the smaller companies that are trying to do the right thing. So it's not cut and dried, like what factories are good and bad depending on countries. And I would just encourage everyone to ask questions with to the companies that they're working for about their practices. Emma was the.
I'll come back to that question. So the question wasn't Urban, so like Anthropology, Urban Outfitters, one of the brands that was using factories without paying into contributing to the Accord. So this can also happen, right? Where multiple brands are sourcing from the same factory. And so brands can benefit from the fact that those factories have been made safer by the Accord. But it's incredibly important for those brands, especially when they're very large ones, to be paying into that program. And so that's correct. The person was asking about urban. They have not signed on to the Accord program. And it's very important for those large brands that make up a very large amount of the sourcing to be leaders and to invest in those programs so that all brands who are sourcing from those factories are equally benefiting in what they're putting in and what they're getting out from those protections. So thanks for those questions.
And I would say it's the same for any binding agreement and legislation in general. We really need the large companies to lead the charge because they have the most impact at a national level, you know, both like in the global north and in the countries where they are producing. They have so much influence. So yeah, great question. Thank you. Bryce, do you have a question? Do you want to come off mute?
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to say amazing work, by the way. Honestly, this is just delicious. This is beautiful, honestly. I am campaigning in Scotland for a circular economy bill, which is currently at stage 2 in the Scottish Parliament. And so basically, I would love to help. I'd love to get some guidance on how I can show this report in a very TLDR version, which is very easy for MSPs, member of Scottish Parliament, can be able to look at and be able to actually have a lot of impact, and it creates impact to them to actually have fashion on the face of the bill, because I think this is going to be super critical moving forward. But and also I would love to highlight this because I'm not sure if you've heard about the breaking news that happened yesterday, but the Competition and Markets Authority in the United Kingdom have secured the landmark changes from ASOS, Boohoo, and Asda, um, basically on greenwashing, and so basically that they're now having to agree some serious legal undertakings with the UK government now to talk about how they're basically the green claims, statements about fabrics, the criteria for green ranges, use of imagery, product filters, environmental targets, accreditation schemes, etc. So I'm just wondering is how can we also use this to lobby the UK, like not the civil servants, such as within the Competition and Markets Authority, to really to push them on basically getting more brands to join this basically because I think this is going to be more brands than the ones I've mentioned because I think this is going to be super important. So yeah, I'm looking for your guidance and supporting this because this is something which is just incredible research and I just really want to like take some action on it and really deliver some change at a local level and also regional level as well. Thank you.
That's so awesome, the work that you're doing in Scotland. I used to live in Edinburgh, so that makes me very happy. To answer your first question about how to use a report or engage lawmakers with it, I know it is a hefty piece of writing. We do have a couple of specific sections that you may want to just pull out and share as kind of like one pages with lawmakers, particularly on legislation and what kind of questions we should be asking when it comes to what is good legislation, things that ensure what we call upchain liability or upchain accountability. This is sort of the notion that because of the power dynamics in fashion, it's again these wealthy and influential brands and retailers at the top that have long benefited from exploiting workers and polluting the communities where they produce, that ultimately bear the responsibility for the human rights and environmental outcomes that occur throughout the life cycle of their products, from design and raw material right through the end of life and post-consumer, which it sounds like this bill is trying to tackle. And so good legislation should ideally include upchain liability mechanisms based on this premise of upchain accountability. And this means that it is the fashion brands and retailers that are held legally and thus financially accountable for mitigating and remedying adverse human rights and environmental outcomes that occur within and as a result of their value chains. Specifically when it comes to like circularity or EPR, extended producer responsibility legislation, this could be the inclusion of a mandate that requires financing to actually flow from the fashion brands that are churning out these millions of garments to where the clothing ultimately ends up, or to the communities that are actually doing reusing, recycling, and that are managing the inevitable waste. And so I really also encourage you to ask questions about these accountability mechanisms. Who's actually paying for, and where is the finance flowing, where there are like fines and those sort of accountability mechanisms in the reports. And then the second question, sorry, what was that?
Oh, the second question was like, remember the contact that we got about Boohoo and ASOS and the green claims. And so, Alexa, I don't know if you want to share the communication that we had about that.
Sure. So our communications with brands are confidential, but we did have seen that there was a public statement made by, I think it's called the CMA. And basically, so I believe that there was no legal liability or repercussions for the green claims, but these brands that were implicated do have to now follow this new set of guidelines. And so I think that what this case and a lot of other greenwashing cases brings to light is that there's just such still a need for disclosures. We know that there's certifications out there, but of course, there's so much nuanced and complicated information behind those certifications that we can't really expect ourselves and consumers to understand fully. And so the reason why we asked for such detailed disclosures on labor rights, living wages, those kinds of aspects is because without that, there's no data to really back these claims that these companies were making. And it's not clear that when they do mark something as being green or more environmentally friendly or conscious, that that's actually backed with data.
Yeah, and to Emily's point in the chat, this is such a great example about why we need legally binding agreements in the industry. There are no set definitions about what sustainable materials are, preferred materials, or and so it's huge. And hopefully, because of cases like these, companies will be more and more careful about what they're putting out and what they're putting into their products. I hope that answers your questions, Bryce. If not, feel free to follow up.
Yeah, just honestly, I just want to say thank you very much. I'm just wondering, like, is what could be with this crescendo of emotion or crescendo of mobilization of feeling that this is about to take place. What can I as an ambassador do to effectively add on and to really be able to put that pressure on to like MSPs within like Edinburgh Parliament in Edinburgh, and also how can I like keep on that pressure to get more of these companies added to that CMA agreement? Because the thing is this, so I think this is going to be something that's going to be really critical in UK organising, is to try and be able to make sure we do get companies to oblige to basically to have legally binding agreements put on them, because they're reckless and they don't care about anyone else but their CEOs and their profit margins. And we need to be anti-capitalist. We need to really be able to like take them down, and hopefully that's going to happen. And I just also quickly to add, just before I come off, just before I mute, is there is actually might potentially going to be something which I'm not sure if you're aware of, but the Stop Rosebank campaign are have let us know that there's a Supreme Court verdict going to be happening um, on which is happening, and it's going to be the Finch case, which is going to bring up um, it's going to rule potentially on basically companies having to legally well basically UK government take into scope 3 emissions, which was mentioned in the report, and basically take things forward. So I think that that's going to be quite interesting to see if that court case will actually impact the fashion industry, not just the oil and gas industry, and actually be able to, and actually hopefully that might affect things. So I'll put a link in the chat just so people can have a look at, and hope that helps. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, snaps to everything that you said. It sounds like you're doing you know, the good work already, and so I would encourage you to keep maybe like two things. So, you know, keep putting pressure on and asking policymakers what the provisions of the legislation that's being written are. Do they include, you know, upchain accountability, upchain liability mechanisms? You know, are they actually holding actors accountable for what's going on, you know, within their supply chains? And then, you know, linking arms with other communities, like the Rose Bank activists, for example. You know, the fashion industry gives license to the fossil fuel industry. Most of the clothes that we wear and produce are made out of fossil fuels. And so, you know, continue to, you know, use the roadmaps laid out within this report to educate those around you, to grow your community, to link arms with other activists, and then keep putting that like pressure on government that way. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing in Scotland. It's very, very cool. Elizabeth Joy.
Hi. I had a more, I don't know if it's a general question, but I guess in terms of practicalities of like, let's say a sustainable or fashion brand that scored 0, like they're like not doing any of these things. They decide that they're ready to turn a new leaf. Maybe they hire a sustainability consultant. They finally hire, let's say, a sustainability team, or they actually empower their sustainability team that already exists. What would be like step one, like the foundation? Like there's a lot here, and all of it feels very important and is very important. But, you know, perhaps outside of transparency of like just mapping their supply chain, what would be like step one that they should take, or step 1 and 2?
Well, my first answer was going to be map their supply chain, really know who your suppliers are and who's making your clothes.
So maybe their second step.
Yeah, Alexa can and chime in as well based on like our work. But I would say taking a look at like how as a company you are either empowering or disempowering your suppliers to sort of uphold the minimum social and environmental standards that you are setting for them. You know, we see that like it's the norm really within the industry to have a supplier code of conduct that companies are asking their suppliers to meet. You know, that's everything to do with wages and working hours to sort of like the environment stuff. But a lot of the time, companies are just setting those standards, asking suppliers to meet them without actually assisting them to do so. And particularly if it's a larger fashion company, they have the wealth and power to actually financially assist or incentivize companies to make change. So to sort of recognize the levers that you have as a fashion brand to support your suppliers and really treat them as partners, ask them what they need, what is available to them, where they need support, and really just keep that dialogue open rather than just sort of dictating sort of one-sided or self-serving contract terms or what have you to your suppliers. Really, a lot of, you know, supplier communities in the global south, they're facing the impacts of the climate crisis already. They have worked in this industry for so long. They understand the issues on a different level, and perhaps have solutions that are not available to see at the like CEO or corporate level. So really co-creating solutions and strategies with your supplier partners, I think, is super key.
Yeah, thank you. And I kind of have a follow-up question if nobody, I don't want to like take up time though if somebody else has a question. But yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. And with that, obviously that work takes like investment. Even with the, you know, the minimum wage increase in Bangladesh, very few brands increased the prices they were paying to their suppliers after that. But in the same time, a lot of fashion brands were seeing sales declining, kind of like, you know, whether it's a recession or a reset after like the COVID boom, you know, however one interprets that. So how do we make the case of like the financial reality, and like probably these brands still have enough money, but like there's also this sort of expectation that they have X amount of profit to their shareholders. you know, I find it's just really challenging with like, especially public companies, of like, how do you, they just see money in such a different way. They see that like this certain profit is necessary to keep and this certain growth, like they have to keep it to keep their shareholders happy. Otherwise, you know, the CEO might get kicked out. And how does Remake like manage those conversations? And kind of the second part is that, do you find it easier to talk with like privately owned companies versus publicly traded ones?
There are so many juicy nuggets in that question, so thank you for asking,
With a big
asking it. And we do dive into this in a few different places in the report, because you're right, like ultimately we are operating within a capitalist system whereby these big companies are beholden to their shareholders who just want to see, you know, annual like profit growth. And in this current system, that sort of relies on annual product output growth. So you're making more and more products every year. And so we really need to actually sort of take a good, long, hard look at ourselves and address that at a systemic level. Like we can't continue going down that road. We actually need to sort of maybe pause and look at how we measure success within this industry. And that's, I guess, to do with taking down capitalism and looking at things like degrowth, which is not, it's a big, at this point, sort of radical conversation. But what I will say is that there is and we have a case study in the report in the environmental justice or climate section on this. But a Cornell report that was released last year sort of really dived into the effects that climate shocks are already having on production countries and apparel production. And that's going to have an effect on the bottom line of companies, which is going to affect, you know, profits, shareholder profits. And so, yeah, I guess having to talk to shareholders in a language that they understand and in terms that they understand. And if they don't address, not only mitigate the effects of climate change, so reduce their climate impacts, but adapt to the impacts of climate change that are already here, by ensuring that their supply chains are resilient in the face of these climate shocks, that is actually going to affect their profits. And so I guess that's sort of one way to speak to the shareholders, yeah, in that language that they will understand.
Yeah, totally appreciate that insight. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, and I see Emily just dropped the Cornell report in the chat. I would also encourage everyone to go and have a look at that as well. We reference it quite a bit in ours, and it's also, yeah, super juicy and sort of really outlines the effects, you know, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line of climate in these production countries.
I have another question. I'm wondering if anyone from the team thinks that we could ever expect for big brands to diversify their revenue or their income streams so that it doesn't just come from making more products. Like if they were to anything from creating workshops for mending, things like that, is that too naive to think that the big box stores would do that?
I mean, at this point, I don't think it's naive. It's like super necessary, right? Like this is like literally like our survival on this planet. And it's interesting to see, like, over the last couple of years of reporting on these companies, like this degrowth conversation has become more normalized. It's less radical. Like, whereas before people would say to us, "Oh, don't use that terminology," like, "Oh, don't talk about sort of like this post-growth world." It was very like hush hush. But we are starting to see the normalization of like, okay, we really need to pursue different revenue streams, but simultaneously we need to reduce product output. And there are a lot of like logistical issues. You need reverse logistics infrastructure. Right now, it's actually more expensive to you know, take back products, like rental programs, recycle them. And so we really need like investment in that. But it's super, super crucial, because yeah, we really don't even need this much clothing. But yeah, in a nutshell, I think it's less and less radical. And with the EPR legislation and circularity legislation that we're seeing, you know, companies might be almost backed into a corner with that, for lack of a better phrase. I don't know if Alexa or Emily or Julie, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I was also just going to add that, like, also, so we are seeing an increase in some of these alternative revenue streams, but it's important that they're implemented in a way that just doesn't run parallel to linear growth, as Becca had mentioned. So if you still have um, a rental program, but it still fuels the same kind of mindset where you're just uh, buying new product and kind of turning over trends like every other week, then that doesn't really get us anywhere. So we try and have these conversations internally with brands. Of course, it's such a difficult conversation to have, especially with a lot of companies who are public. And of course, as these issues are brought up by shareholders and are brought up by their consumers, then that makes the issue, it makes the company care about the issue more. So there's a sense that, you know, there has to be some demand there, and the companies need to be aware that it exists.
Yeah, okay, that I think that's really helpful. To kind of piggyback off of that, do you think ultimately that brands, like some brands will only change when they get consumer backlash? Like once they get the Instagram, the YouTube, all the TikTok comments of this brand XYZ, like in the past, from what I've seen, that's when brands decide to change because they can't sell more product because they realized it has reviews of like terrible reviews from so many people, or something came out about the company that people don't like, and they have backlash. And it kind of seems like that's kind of the only time that big brands are willing to make any type of change.
I think yes and no. I think in a very short term, yes, like sort of reactionary response to consumer backlash. But what we've seen, and this sort of relates to a lot of our campaigning work, is that it's all like water off a duck's back. Like they seem to be immune to sort of any reputational damage. And so this is kind of really why like legislation and binding agreements are really sort of the only thing that's going to move the needle, we think. And also at the end of the day, like consumers they can idealistically say that they want, you know, more sustainable products, you know, less products, but it comes down to price. We all are sort of constrained by that. And so our energy is probably better spent advocating for legislation rather than like stressing ourselves out about individual purchases. But this change really needs to come from the companies and from a systemic level. And so that's why like legislation is, as we continue to say, so crucial, because without that, it's just like one scandal and people forget about it and they move on and they continue churning out like terrible products. Yeah.
Thank you.
Carly, do you want to go and then we can answer Elizabeth's question in the chat?
Yeah, sure. Hi. This is so wonderful. Thank you so much. A couple minutes ago, Becca, you were talking about how like degrowth was just like not a term that was like acceptable to bring up with brands, and how it's becoming kind of something they may be able to listen to. So that kind of made me think about, wanted to ask you how the accountability report, the categories have changed over the years, and how the scoring has changed, and also maybe what is next, if you foresee any future changes for the 2024 report.
Yeah, thank you. So we updated the criteria by which we assess brands in 2021. Before we called this work our transparency work, and it really was assessing companies based on like their disclosures. You know, what like supplier lists, you know, did they have goals to pay living wages, to reduce emissions and what have you. And then with everything that happened in the pandemic, you know, with the pay up campaign, companies sort of just like posting black squares after the murder of George Floyd, but not really investing deeply in diversifying their teams and that sort of thing. And with the climate crisis, like literally here, we were like, no, we have to sort of raise the bar on how we assess and measure companies. And so we really pivoted to measuring on progress rather than goal setting alone. And so we got a whole bunch of experts from within and around the industry to weigh in to sort of revamp our criteria. And so we beefed up our governance section and our environmental justice sections, and we brought in the commercial practices section, which is kind of what we've been talking about, how companies relate to their suppliers, how do they actually assist and incentivize them to meet these targets. And so that was like, yeah, a huge undertaking, and sort of, yeah, companies then started scoring really badly because obviously it had become the norm to set all of these beautiful goals, but no one was actually making progress on them. And so to that point, we've seen a stagnance in the scores over the last couple of years. The average score this year was 14 out of 150, which was the same as last year. I mean, that's like abysmal, really. And so in terms of the future of this work, we are like sort of internally assessing, it's not necessarily useful to continue reporting on a lack of progress. So how can we galvanize change? How can we use these reports to like empower and educate our community and grow our community, and get this information in the hands of shareholders and policymakers and all of these different stakeholders to actually now make change. We've seen that we're not making change quick enough. So yeah, it's something that we're continuously thinking about, and that's why we love hearing from all of you about like how you might use this report, what feedback you have on it as a tool, and all sorts of things. So yeah, we really encourage you to dive in and give us feedback and tell us how you're using it and how you're using it to shape conversations within your workplace, and how your teammates are responding to it and what have you. That kind of segues onto Elizabeth Joy's question about media outlets and content creators and engaging and sharing and talking about this report. I would really encourage people in the press and media to dive into the intersectionalities that we uplift in our report, and sort of revolutionize, I guess, how sustainability is talked about, rather than just focusing on materials or climate. Really think about like the human side and the systemic change aspects and solutions that we point to. There have been some fun pieces of content that have come out, which is really cool for us to see. I don't know if that answers your question, or if Em, you might have a great perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist myself, I look to this report as verified, fact-filled, third-party information that I can cite all the time. And like we mentioned in the beginning of the call, the research available here is open source. And so all of the material that we provide, you can back up those claims, find them yourselves online. And I think that's really important. And we really, really encourage folks to use this as a go-to for any content, any stories they're working on. And of course, if you have questions, please reach out. We want to help you utilize these findings in like helping to make the conversation even more accessible and bring them back to the communities you serve.
And just to sort of follow on with that, we would love to hear from you what kind of content you would like, or programming you would like us to put on around these issues, around the report, whether it's a specific section that you want us to deep dive in further, like commercial practices. That's something that it is complicated. It's to do with contracting and fashion supply chain. So if there is interest in that area or what have you, we really want to cater to your needs as people within this industry that can take this knowledge and make change from within and outside. So yeah, really, really want to hear from you. We're here to serve.
If we do have any ideas or questions, is there a best email or person to connect with?
Yeah, we can put all our email addresses in the chat. If you have questions about the report, Alexa and I are your go-tos. Programming, Alison, Emily, education stuff as well, Julie. So we'll all pop our emails here in the chat, and you can reach out directly to us. our emails are all like our names at remake.world, if that's helpful.
Okay.
Also, feel free to drop any questions in the ambassador Slack and tag us directly. We'll respond to questions there as well.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know there was an ambassador Slack. Okay, that's good to know.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And mentioning the ambassador Slack is actually where I was going to go to next. So thank you for bringing it up. If you guys are not in our ambassador program and you want to grow your engagement in our movement, you can become an ambassador. It's free. I'll drop the link in the chat. We have about a little over 2,000 ambassadors now globally, which is unbelievable. And for our ambassador community, we have educational resources, community programs, we have in-depth information on different campaigns that we're doing, and we do days of action like lobby days or emails or calling into, different politicians or leaders. So I became an ambassador myself. That's how I got involved with Remake before I came onto the team. So I love the program. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to ambassador@remake.world. We also have an upcoming program, like I mentioned at the beginning of the call. It's open to the public, so if you're not an ambassador, you can still join. It's on Monday, April 1st at noon Eastern, and we will be talking about the strides that Bangladeshi workers have made through the international accord since the 2013 Rana Plaza collapse. So the link is in the chat. Please feel free to join or share out with your networks. And then finally, as Becca mentioned at the beginning of the call, Remake takes no funding from brands. So the work like the accountability report is made possible because of people who actively are passionate about making positive change, like all of you. So you can support Remake's work at our donation page and learn more about us and the campaigns that we do on their website. And as mentioned, everybody's emails are in the chat, so feel free to email us anytime. And if you have any specific questions about anything that I just mentioned above, you can email ambassador@remake.world, and that will go to multiple people on our education team. So thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you, Becca, Alexa, and Julie for, first of all, doing the report and then coming today to talk to us about it. And we hope to see you all soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for joining. Bye.
Bye, everybody.